Have you ever popped the hood on a mid-70s muscle car and wondered what happened? One day these engines were screaming down the quarter mile, and the next they could barely get out of their own way. Well, here is the thing. During the 1970s, mechanics and hot rodders came up with some of the most creative, borderline insane engine tricks the automotive world has ever seen. Tricks that got banned, outlawed, or regulated into oblivion. But decades later, today's mechanics are looking back at these so-called cheats and saying, those guys were geniuses. We are counting down 25 banned engine tricks from the 70s that mechanics now say were way ahead of their time. From shade tree mechanics working under bare light bulbs to NASCAR legends pushing million-dollar machines, these are the people who refuse to let the rules kill their horsepower. If you are into cars, history, or just love a good story about sticking it to the man, hit that like button, subscribe, and let us get into it. Number 25. The cigarette foil restrictor plate. When NASCAR started slapping restrictor plates on engines in the early 70s to control speeds, crews needed a way around them. The plates were simple aluminum discs with holes that limited airflow into the carburetor. So someone came up with a brilliantly devious solution. They made a fake plate out of thin cardboard wrapped in silver foil from a cigarette pack. When inspectors peered into the carburetor throat, it looked like the real thing. But the moment that engine fired up, the fake plate got sucked right into the engine and blown out the tailpipe. By the time the green flag dropped, there was no restrictor plate at all. NASCAR eventually caught on and started numbering and tracking every plate. But the sheer audacity of it, a piece of cigarette wrapper defeating a racing regulation. Today's engineers still talk about it as one of the cleverest workarounds in motorsport history. It cost practically nothing, required zero mechanical skill, and it worked flawlessly every single time. Number 24. Advancing ignition. Timing beyond factory specs. When emissions regulations hit in the early 70s, one of the first things manufacturers did was retard the ignition timing. This meant the spark plug fired later in the compression stroke, reducing nitrogen oxide emissions but absolutely murdering performance. The engine ran sluggish, hot, and thirsty. Mechanics figured out quickly that twisting the distributor a few degrees back toward pre-emission settings woke the engine right up. More power, better throttle response, and often improved fuel economy. The problem was that this violated federal tampering laws once the Clean Air Act of 1970 took effect. You could get fined, lose your shop certification, or both. But here is the kicker. Modern engine management systems now use variable timing as a core strategy. Every car today constantly adjusts ignition timing hundreds of times per second. Those shade tree mechanics were doing by hand what computers now do automatically. They understood the science intuitively. They just did not have the legal permission to apply it. Number 23. EGR valve deletion. The exhaust gas recirculation valve showed up in the early 70s to reduce nitrogen oxide emissions. It routed exhaust gas back into the intake manifold, lowering combustion temperatures. Smart concept. But the engines ran rougher, produced less power, and the intake manifolds slowly clogged with carbon deposits that looked like black cement. Mechanics hated them. The go-to move was to unbolt the valve, install a block-off plate, and cap the vacuum lines. The engine immediately ran smoother and felt snappier. Was it legal? Absolutely not. The EPA considered it tampering, but modern mechanics now admit the early EGR systems were poorly implemented. The concept was sound, the execution was crude. Today's engines still use exhaust gas recirculation, but electronically controlled and precisely metered. The 70s mechanics were not wrong that the system needed work, they were just ahead of the fix. Number 22. Smog pump removal. The air injection reactor pump, better known as the smog pump, was bolted to nearly every American engine by the mid-70s. Belt-driven, it whined like a wounded animal and pumped fresh air into the exhaust manifold to burn off unburned hydrocarbons. That belt-driven pump robbed 3 to 10 horsepower. Mechanics figured out that removing it, rerouting the belt, and plugging the exhaust manifold ports gave them a cleaner engine bay and more pep. Aftermarket companies actually sold smog pump delete pulleys. Of course, it was federally illegal, but the logic was irrefutable. You were removing a parasitic load, and the only thing lost was a bandage on a poorly tuned combustion process. Modern catalytic converter technology made the smog pump completely obsolete. The mechanics who ripped them off in '76 were doing what the auto industry did officially by the late '80s. Sometimes the guys in the grease-stained coveralls see the future before the engineers in the lab coats do. Number 21. High compression builds with leaded fuel. Before 1975, gas stations pumped fuel with octane ratings near 100 that supported engines at 11-to-1 compression. When leaded gas was phased out to protect catalytic converters and human health, those high-octane days ended overnight. Manufacturers dropped compression ratios to 8-to-1 or lower, and engines lost massive power. But hot rodders kept building high-compression engines anyway. They milled heads, swapped in flat-top pistons, and ran whatever high-octane fuel they could find, sometimes adding lead additives technically banned for street use. The results were spectacular. More power, better thermal efficiency, and that glorious mechanical authority only a high-compression engine delivers. Today, modern engines are creeping back to 11 and 12-to-1 compression, thanks to direct injection and knock sensors. The '70s builders knew what worked. The fuel technology just had to catch up. It took nearly 4 decades, but the industry eventually came back around to exactly what those hot rodders were building in their garages. Number 20. Catalytic converter. Gutting. The catalytic converter arrived on every new American car in 1975, and the first generation was terrible. Massive, restrictive, extremely hot, and prone to clogging. Mechanics noticed that removing or gutting the converter freed up exhaust flow dramatically. Some guys smashed out the ceramic honeycomb with a steel rod, leaving the shell intact so the car looked stock underneath. Others welded in a straight pipe. The performance difference was immediately noticeable at higher RPMs, where back pressure choked the engine. Wildly illegal, yes. But the early converters were an engineering problem. They were not designed to work with the crude air-fuel management of '70s carburetors. Modern high-flow catalytic converters barely create measurable restriction. The frustration those mechanics felt was completely valid. The technology was not ready yet. They were not anti-environment. They were anti-bad engineering. And honestly, that is a reasonable position. Number 19. Recurving the distributor factory distributors in the '70s had extremely conservative advance curves for emissions compliance. The mechanical and vacuum advance mechanisms were calibrated to keep timing lazy and late. Mechanics discovered they could open the distributor, swap advance springs for lighter ones, change the limit bushing, and alter the entire timing curve. Some would order a pre-emissions distributor kit from a '68 small block and bolt it right in. The engine suddenly had crisp throttle response, more torque, and better drivability. One common trick was ordering parts by the earlier model year and telling the parts counter it was for a different car. The parts were physically identical, just calibrated differently. This was federal tampering, but the principle was flawless. Today, every modern engine uses fully variable ignition timing controlled by the ECU. Those mechanics were tuning the exact same way computers do now. The only difference is they used intuition and a timing light instead of a microprocessor and oxygen sensors. Number 18. Water-methanol injection. Water injection in engines goes back to World War II fighter planes, but '70s hot rodders brought it to the street. Spray a fine mist of water or water-methanol, mix into the intake charge, and the water absorbs heat as it evaporates, dramatically cooling the incoming air. Cooler air is denser, meaning more oxygen, meaning more power. Some guys rigged homemade systems using windshield washer pumps and garden sprayer nozzles. The more sophisticated setups used pressure-activated nozzles that only sprayed under heavy throttle. The trick was especially popular with supercharged builds where intake temperatures got dangerously high. While not banned outright, it was considered an illegal modification in emissions testing jurisdictions. Today, water-methanol injection is widely respected. Companies like Snow Performance sell complete kits, and even BMW has used it from the factory. Those backyard engineers were decades ahead. They figured out the thermodynamics with garden hose parts and a basic understanding of how heat kills power. Number 17. The Smokey Yunick Oversized Fuel Line. Smokey Yunick was a NASCAR legend. In the 70s, NASCAR had strict rules about fuel cell capacity, but the rules specified only the tank size, saying nothing about fuel lines. So Smokey ran an enormous 2-inch diameter fuel line from tank to engine. That single line held several extra gallons. When inspectors pulled the tank, it measured correctly. The fuel line just happened to hold enough extra gas for a few more laps at Daytona. When inspectors once removed the tank entirely, listing too many violations to count, Smokey reportedly climbed in, started the engine, and drove back to his garage without the tank, just on the fuel in his lines. NASCAR eventually wrote rules addressing every conceivable fuel system component. But Smokey's ability to find what the rulebook did not say remains the gold standard of creative engineering. Number 16. Tire soaking for better grip. In the 70s, racing crews discovered that soaking tires in chemical solutions could soften the rubber compound, dramatically increasing grip. They would take tires back to the hotel, fill the bathtub with a special solution, and let them soak overnight. The softened rubber gripped the track like Velcro, giving a massive advantage during qualifying. NASCAR caught on and began impounding tires immediately after mounting, stamping them with car numbers and running chemical tests on the surface. The practice was banned and could result in disqualification. But the science was solid. Modern tire companies now produce purpose-built compounds with varying softness levels for different track conditions. The shade tree chemists of the 70s were essentially doing custom tire compounding in a Holiday Inn bathtub. It was crude, it smelled terrible, and it absolutely worked. Number 15. Dry ice fuel. Cooling. Some racing crews in the 70s figured out that cooling fuel with dry ice before it entered the engine produced more power. Cold fuel is denser, meaning more molecules per volume, meaning more energy per combustion cycle. They packed dry ice around the fuel cell, around fuel lines, or into a cooler that the fuel passed through on its way to the carburetor. Power gains were small but real, and in racing, fractions of a second separate winners from losers. NASCAR banned the practice once they figured out what was happening, adding fuel temperature requirements. But the underlying principle is now used everywhere. Modern fuel injection systems manage fuel temperature precisely. Intercoolers chill the intake charge for the same reason. Formula One teams obsess over thermal management of every fluid. Those guys with their coolers full of dry ice understood the physics perfectly. They did not have engineering degrees. They had something better. They had curiosity and a willingness to experiment with anything that might squeeze out one more horsepower. Number 14. Porting and polishing. Intake and exhaust. Hand-porting cylinder heads and intake manifolds was one of the most effective modifications of the 70s. Factory castings were rough, with bumps, ridges, and mismatched openings that disrupted airflow. A skilled mechanic with a die grinder could reshape ports, smooth surfaces, and open restrictions. On a stock 350 Chevy, a good port job was worth 30 to 50 horsepower. The problem came when emissions regulations made it illegal to modify intake components that were part of the certified system. In competition, porting beyond specifications could put you outside class rules. Today, aftermarket cylinder heads from AFR, TrickFlow, and Edelbrock come CNC ported from the factory with flow numbers that would make a 70s speed shop weep. The hand-porting pioneers proved what was possible. They showed the industry that factory castings were leaving massive amounts of power on the table, and the aftermarket has been capitalizing on that insight ever since. Number 13. Cross-ram intake manifolds. The cross-ram intake used long-tuned runners crossing over the engine top, with the carburetor for the left bank sitting on the right side and vice versa. This runner length created a ram effect at specific RPMs, essentially supercharging the cylinders with incoming air-fuel momentum. The result was a massive power spike at high RPMs. Pontiac and Chrysler offered cross-rams on their most potent engines, and they were weapons on the drag strip, but terrible on the street. Rough idle, poor low-speed response, impossible to tune for daily driving. Insurance companies surcharged cross-ram-equipped cars, and emissions regulations made them impractical. Today's variable-length intake manifolds use electronically controlled valves to change runner length on the fly. Short runners for low RPM torque, long runners for high RPM power. The cross-ram was the granddaddy of them all. The 70s gearheads who bolted these on understood the physics of resonance tuning before most engineers had a name for it. Number 12. Open headers and uncorked exhaust. Running open headers, tube-style exhaust with no mufflers or converters, was the simplest and most dramatic power modification of the 70s. Removing exhaust restriction let the engine breathe, and horsepower jumped immediately. On a big block, the difference could be 30 to 50 horsepower. The sound was glorious and terrifying. Open headers on a 455 Pontiac at wide-open throttle shook windows from a block away, obviously illegal on the street, but racers ran them constantly, and street guys bolted them on for weekend drag strip runs. The engineering lesson was clear. Exhaust restriction was killing these engines. Today, modern systems use mandrel-bent tubing, high-flow converters, and computer-optimized headers, delivering almost the same flow while staying legal and quiet. Those guys running open headers proved back pressure was the enemy. And every modern exhaust system in existence is basically an apology for the restrictive junk that came bolted to 70s cars from the factory. Number 11. Nitrous oxide hidden systems in NASCAR. In the mid-70s, NASCAR teams discovered nitrous oxide, a small tank hidden inside the frame, connected to the intake manifold, could deliver a massive power shot for 30 to 40 seconds, enough for a qualifying lap or a last lap pass. The biggest scandal came at the 1976 Daytona 500. Jay Foyt and Darrell Waltrip both had qualifying times thrown out after inspectors found nitrous systems in their cars. One crew even cast a new intake manifold with a nitrous bottle hidden inside, the supply line disguised as a radiator hose. It cost $3,000 and never actually raced, but the engineering was extraordinary. NASCAR cracked down hard, but the creativity was remarkable. Modern nitrous oxide injection is now a legitimate performance modification, with companies making complete street-legal kits. What was once the dirtiest secret in stock car racing is now available at your local speed shop for a few $100s. Number 10. Cam swaps to pre-emission profiles. By the mid-70s, factory camshafts were designed for emissions, not performance, mild lift, conservative duration, and timing profiles that prioritized compliance over power. Mechanics figured out that swapping in a camshaft from a 68 or 69 engine transformed the motor. More valve lift and longer duration meant better airflow, sharper response, and significantly more horsepower. That choppy, aggressive, idle muscle car guys loved came back immediately. Combine the cam swap with a distributor recurve and headers, and you essentially had a pre-emissions engine in a post-emissions car. Illegal tampering, yes. But the logic was irresistible. Today, performance camshafts are among the most popular aftermarket modifications. Comp cams, Crane, and Lunati offer hundreds of profiles. The 70s mechanics who made those early swaps proved the camshaft was the heart of the engine's personality. Change the cam, and you change everything about how the engine feels, sounds, and performs. Number 9. Vacuum Advance Modification. The vacuum advance canister on the Distributor was one of the most misunderstood components of the era. It advanced timing based on engine load, pulling timing forward during light throttle for better economy and pulling back under heavy load to prevent detonation. Factory calibrations were extremely conservative. Mechanics discovered they could modify or replace the canister for more advance, faster response, or both. Some drilled out the internal orifice, others swapped in adjustable units for precise curve control. The result was an engine that cruised efficiently, responded better, and ran cooler at highway speeds. Messing with emissions components was illegal. But modern engine management systems dedicate enormous computing power to doing exactly this. Variable valve timing, electronic throttle control, and adaptive maps all serve the same purpose those mechanics achieved with a screwdriver and a timing light. Number 8. Electric fan conversion. Every 70s factory engine had a belt-driven mechanical fan bolted to the water pump, spinning whenever the engine ran, regardless of need. At highway speeds, with plenty of airflow through the radiator, the fan was just eating horsepower. Some mechanics replaced it with an electric unit triggered by a temperature switch, freeing measurable power. The engine only cooled itself when needed. Some tests showed 5 to 15 horsepower gains. The conversion also reduced fan blade failure risk, a genuine safety concern with the flexible fans of the era. While not strictly banned, it altered the certified engine configuration and could cause inspection failures. Today, virtually every vehicle uses an electric cooling fan. The technology is standard. Those 70s mechanics who rewired their cooling systems were building what every manufacturer would eventually adopt. Number 7. Lead additives as octane boosters. When leaded gasoline disappeared from pumps, owners of high-compression muscle cars faced a serious problem. Their engines were designed for 100 octane, and the new unleaded was 87 to 91. The result was devastating detonation that could destroy pistons. Many mechanics turned to aftermarket lead additives that raised octane and provided valve seat lubrication. Widely available at auto parts stores, though using them contradicted the unleaded mandate. Some guys mixed leaded aviation fuel into their tank, which was both illegal for road use and potentially dangerous. But the need was legitimate. Those engines physically could not run on available fuel without detonating. Today, modern octane boosters, ethanol-free premium fuel, and hardened valve seats have solved the problem. But the mechanics who kept those engines alive through the transition deserve credit for their resourcefulness. They saved a generation of muscle cars from becoming undrivable paperweights sitting in garages. Number 6. Underdrive pulleys. 70s engines had a stack of belt-driven accessories on the front. The alternator, power steering pump, water pump, smog pump, and air conditioning compressor all spun at speeds determined by pulley ratios. Clever mechanics realized that installing slightly larger pulleys on accessories slowed them down and reduced parasitic power drain. The accessories still functioned, just at lower output. The alternator charged less aggressively. The power steering worked slightly slower, but the engine freed up several horsepower wasted spinning accessories faster than necessary. The modification fell into a legal gray area. It did not remove emissions equipment, but altered the certified configuration. Today, underdrive pulley kits are one of the most popular bolt-on modifications available. Companies like March and Professional Products sell them for virtually every combination. What was once a shade tree secret is now a catalog item. Number 5. The Ford camber banned from NASCAR. In 1964, Ford developed the single overhead cam 427, known as the Cammer, a massive engine with chain-driven overhead cams on each bank, producing over 600 horsepower in race trim. Ford built it to dominate NASCAR. When Bill France Sr. saw what it could do, he banned it before it ever competed in stock car racing, citing it was not a production engine. Ford shifted the Cammer to drag racing, where it terrorized the quarter-mile and Mercury Comet funny cars and top fuel dragsters. The engine made enormous power on nitromethane and was nearly unbeatable. The ban killed its NASCAR career, but proved overhead cam technology was the future. Today, virtually every modern performance engine uses overhead cams. Ford's Cammer was decades ahead. The engine too good for NASCAR is basically the blueprint for how every serious engine is built today. Sometimes being ahead of your time means being punished for it. Number 4. Honda's oval piston engine. In the late 70s, Honda engineer Soichiro Irimajiri created a motorcycle engine with oval-shaped pistons. Instead of a round bore, each cylinder had an elongated oval bore with twice the surface area. This allowed 8 valves per cylinder and dual connecting rods per piston. The engine produced extraordinary power for its displacement because it breathed and burned fuel far more efficiently. Honda raced the NR 500 in Motorcycle Grand Prix, and while it struggled with reliability, the technology was revolutionary. The International Motorcycling Federation banned oval pistons for creating an unfair advantage that was impossibly expensive to replicate. Ferrari recently revived interest in oval piston technology for a patented V12 design. What was once too radical for racing may become the future of combustion engines. Irimajiri's creation was 40 years ahead of its time. Number 3. Wax-filled cylinders for inspection. Richard Petty's brother Maurice confessed to wedging wax into their race car engine cylinders. During pre-race technical inspection, officials measured the bore diameter to ensure legal displacement. With wax packed in, the cylinders measured at specification. But once the engine heated up, the wax melted and burned away, revealing the actual oversized bore underneath. The engine was suddenly running larger displacement than allowed, producing more power than any legal car in the field. They only got caught because an inspector noticed the left side tires were slightly too large, leading to a deeper inspection. The 1983 Charlotte penalty cost Petty $35,000 and 104 points. But the trick was a masterpiece of thermodynamic deception. Using the engine's own heat as the trigger mechanism was brilliantly simple. Racing has never seen anything quite like it since. It remains one of the most talked about cheats in the history of stock car racing, and mechanics still shake their heads in disbelief at the sheer creativity of it. Number 2. The Brabham fan car. Gordon Murray's Brabham BT46B is one of the most ingenious machines ever built. In the late 70s, Lotus dominated Formula One with ground effect cars. Murray could not replicate this because his Alfa Romeo engine was too wide for proper underbody tunnels. So he found a loophole. The rules banned movable aerodynamic devices. Murray mounted a massive fan on the rear, driven off the gearbox, claiming its primary purpose was engine cooling. The secondary effect was sucking air from underneath, creating enormous downforce at any speed. The car debuted at the 1978 Swedish Grand Prix, where Niki Lauda dominated. After that single victory, the car was withdrawn and rules rewritten. Murray's thinking was so far ahead that ground effect aerodynamics remains fundamental in Formula One nearly 50 years later. Number 1. Ground effect aerodynamics. In 1977, Colin Chapman of Lotus introduced the Lotus 78, the first true ground effect Formula One car. By shaping the underside like an inverted wing and sealing the edges with sliding skirts, the car created a massive low-pressure zone that sucked it onto the track. The downforce was staggering. Drivers carried corner speeds previously unimaginable. The refined Lotus 79 won 6 races the following year and delivered the championship to Mario Andretti. Every team scrambled to copy the concept. Then the governing body banned it in 1983, mandating flat floors. Speeds were too dangerous, and a skirt failure could mean instant loss of all downforce. But in 2022, Formula One brought ground effect back with modern safety measures. 45 years after Chapman's vision, the sport admitted what everyone knew. Ground effect was the most brilliant innovation in racing history. Chapman did not bend the rules. He reimagined what a race car could be. And every single open-wheel car on the planet today owes something to that moment of pure engineering brilliance in a workshop in Norfolk, England. And there you have it, 25 banned engine tricks from the 70s that mechanics now say were absolute genius. From cigarette foil restrictor plates to ground effect race cars, these innovations proved that the line between cheating and brilliance is thinner than a head gasket. Which one blew your mind the most? And which trick do you think deserves a comeback? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this ride through automotive history, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another deep dive. We will see you in the next one.